She wasn't supposed to be there. No one knocked on those gates. No one dared. Not senators, not rival bosses, not men who had lived entire careers inside the shadows of New York's most dangerous underworld. The iron gates of Mr. Jun's upstate estate weren't just a boundary. They were a message. Turn back. Or don't turn back at all. But she knocked anyway. She was small, maybe 6, maybe 7. Dark brown skin glistening under the downpour, her natural hair plastered flat against her forehead, except for the little white bow still somehow holding on near her temple, like even her accessories refused to give up. Her red coat soaked through to a deeper crimson. Her eyes, God, her eyes, were the kind of wide that didn't come from drama, that came from real. And her voice, when she finally spoke, cracked the night in half. God, can I stay one more night? Mr. Jun stood still. This was a man whose stillness could end careers, whose silence once made a room full of armed men lower their weapons. Tall, sharp-jawed, dark hair damp against his neck, dressed in a white linen shirt that the rain had started to claim. He looked like a painting that hadn't decided yet whether it was a masterpiece or a warning. The jade lotus ring on his right hand caught the golden light spilling from his mansion behind him. He did not move. He did not speak. He just looked at her. And something behind his eyes, something buried under years of calculated coldness, cracked just slightly, like ice in the first week of spring. Then he looked past her. That's when he saw the woman. She was leaning against the black car that had slid to a stop on the gravel, a woman with deep brown skin, sharp bone structure, and the posture of someone who had been trained never to show pain. She wore it anyway, quietly, around the edges of her eyes. Her blazer was torn at the shoulder. Her expression said one thing clearly. I didn't come here to beg, but I will. Her name was Jessica. And in the 12 seconds it took Mr. Jun to read the entire situation, the child, the woman, the car, the absence of anyone else on that road. He understood 2 things simultaneously. 1, these 2 were running from something powerful enough to send them here, to the one address in New York that no sane person approached uninvited. 2, the locket around the little girl's neck was impossible. He had seen that locket once before. They held it once before. He had placed it in a casket himself 20 years ago on a cold afternoon that he had spent every day since trying to forget. That locket was buried, which meant either the dead had started walking or someone had been lying to him for 2 decades. Jun's jaw tightened. He pulled his gaze from the locket back to the girl's face. Her tears were indistinguishable from the rain now, but her eyes didn't waver. She held his stare with a steadiness that didn't belong on a child's face, like she'd been told exactly where to go, exactly what to say, like she had been sent. And that was the moment Mr. Jun realized this night would change everything. He stepped aside. He let them in. The manor swallowed them whole. That was the only way to describe it. One moment they were standing in the cold and the rain and the dark, and then Jun moved and the world shifted with him. The doors opened without him touching them. The staff appeared without being called. And just like that, the storm was behind them, and something far more dangerous was ahead. Amara pressed herself against Jessica's side as they walked through the grand entrance hall. Her little fingers, deep brown, dimpled at the knuckles, still trembling, curled into the fabric of Jessica's blazer like she was the only real thing left in the world. Her red coat dripped a thin trail across marble so white it looked like snow. She didn't speak. She just watched Jun's back as he walked ahead of them, and her eyes carried a knowledge too heavy for her age. Jessica watched him too. She couldn't help it. But he moved like the house belonged to him in a way that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with authority. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because every room already knew. His white shirt clung to the line of his shoulders, damp from the rain. His jaw was set. His hands were still. And yet the entire staff moved around him like planets, orbiting something they couldn't name. A doctor was already waiting at the top of the staircase. Jessica stopped walking. You called a doctor before you even knew who I was. Jun turned. Slowly. His dark eyes found hers across the length of the corridor, and for one suspended moment, the air between them was the loudest thing in the room. I knew enough, he said. Then he looked at Amara. She's cold. Take her upstairs." He said it like a command. He meant it like a shield. Jessica didn't move immediately. Old instincts died hard, and hers had kept her alive for 3 years off the grid. She searched his face for the angle, for the calculation behind the gesture. Every powerful man she had ever known led with generosity when he wanted something back. But Jun had already looked away, already turned his attention to the tall, precise man who had materialized silently at his shoulder. She heard the words run the locket before the door closed behind her. Upstairs, she sat on the edge of a bed that had never been slept in and watched the doctor tend to Amara with practiced hands. The little girl bore it all without flinching, dark eyes forward, jaw set like a soldier. 7 years old and already fluent in the language of surviving rooms where adults held all the power. "You're very brave," the doctor murmured. Amara looked at Jessica, not the doctor. Jessica. And what Jessica saw in that look cracked something open in her chest she had worked 4 years to seal shut. "Is the man going to make them stop chasing us?" Amara asked. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it, because the honest answer was she didn't know what Jun was going to do. She didn't know his angle. She didn't know his price. What she knew was that he had looked at that locket around Amara's neck like a man who had just seen a ghost, and that whatever he'd seen, it had changed his calculus before she'd even opened her mouth. Downstairs, his tech specialist pulled the locket apart under blue light. He worked in silence for 11 minutes. Then he sat back. Then he picked up his phone and called Jun directly instead of sending a message, because what was inside the locket was not the kind of information you put in writing. What he found had nothing to do with sentimentality, and everything to do with why powerful people were willing to let a child die to keep it hidden. Jun listened. He did not react. He asked one question. Then he walked to the window and stood there for a long time, looking at nothing, the jade ring turning slowly on his finger, the way it always turned when something old was being disturbed. She shouldn't have been in that room. There were 32 rooms in Jun's estate. 31 of them were open. The study had been locked since the night he took his first life at 19 years old. He had built the Iron Lotus Syndicate from that room. He had signed his first contract, made his first enemy, and buried his last illusion inside those 4 walls. No staff member had ever entered uninvited. No associate had ever been offered a seat. Amara walked straight in through a door she shouldn't have been able to open. Jun was standing at the window when he heard the soft squeak of her shoes on the hardwood. He took one measured breath, the kind that separated the man he was from the man he might become without it, and then he looked over his shoulder. She stood in the center of the room in borrowed clothes 3 sizes too large, her natural hair still damp and wild around her face, the little white bow miraculously still clinging to one curl. She was looking at the photographs on the wall. Not the accolades, not the maps. The photographs, the only personal things he had ever allowed himself in this space. "That's a girl," Amara said, pointing at the largest frame. Jun turned fully. "Yes." She looked sad. He was quiet for a moment. She was. He crossed the room in slow, deliberate steps and stopped in front of the photograph. The woman in it was young, maybe 20, with his same sharp jaw and the kind of eyes that had always seen further than was comfortable. She was standing at the edge of something, the way people stood when they already knew what was coming. There was something in the set of her mouth, a precision, a patience, that Jun had spent 20 years misreading as grief. He was only now beginning to wonder if it had been something else entirely. "She's gone," he said. "A long time ago." Amara studied the photo a moment longer. Then she reached up and touched the locket at her throat. "My mama gave me this," she said quietly. "She said it belonged to the man with the flower on his ring. She said if I ever got lost, I should find him. She said he would remember." Jun's hand closed around the jade ring without him meaning to. The lotus, his family's seal, a symbol he had never shared with anyone outside of blood. "Where's your mother now?" he asked. Amara looked at the floor. Her lower lip moved once, then pressed still. "She said she had to go somewhere first. She said she'd meet me there." Not like a child sharing news, like a child reciting something memorized, careful, exact, rehearsed, the phrasing too clean, the delivery too steady. She had been coached. Jun crouched to her level, and his dark eyes held hers without softness, but without threat, the look of a man taking something very seriously. Did your mother tell you anything else? Anything at all? Amara hesitated. Then she leaned forward and whispered 4 words directly into his ear. Jun did not move for a very long time after that. When he finally stood, his expression had shifted into something that lived in the space between grief and fury, something cold and ancient and deeply, dangerously awake. He looked once more at the photograph on the wall, at the woman with the patient mouth and the eyes that had always seen further than they let on, and for the first time since he had hung that photograph, he looked at it like a question rather than a memory. He didn't know yet how close he was to the answer. Manhattan looked different from 40 floors up, neat, cleaner, more honest about what it was, a grid of ambition and consequence, all lit up at the edges and hollow at the center. Jun stood at the floor-to-ceiling window with a glass of single malt he hadn't touched, watching the city the way a chess player watched a board mid-game, calculating, measuring, deciding what he was willing to sacrifice before the next move forced his hand. Behind him, Jessica stood in the kitchen of the penthouse in a silk shirt that belonged to no one and dark trousers pressed to a sharp crease. She had found them in the closet and put them on without asking. That told him something. Women who apologized for taking up space were dangerous in one direction. Women who simply took what they needed and moved on, those were dangerous in an entirely different way. "You moved us here fast," she said. Not an accusation, an observation. The way an analyst spoke, collecting data, not starting arguments. "The estate was compromised," Jun replied without turning. A beat of silence. "You knew before I told you." "I knew before you arrived." Jessica set down the glass she'd been holding. Her brown skin caught the blue-silver light of the city skyline, her cheekbones high and precise, her expression doing the careful, controlled thing it did when her mind was working fastest. She was beautiful, the way a locked room was beautiful, entirely self-contained, deeply interesting, and almost certainly hiding something worth the effort of finding out. "So why let us in?" she asked. Jun finally turned. He looked at her across the length of the room, past the low lighting, past the quiet. Past the careful distance they were both pretending was not a choice, and he said, "Because for once, I want to see something worth protecting survive this city." She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then looked away. That was the tell. Jessica Cole did not look away from things that didn't matter to her. Amara was asleep in the back bedroom, curled small under a duvet that swallowed her whole. They had checked on her together, standing in the doorway shoulder to shoulder without meaning to, close enough that Jessica had felt the warmth radiating from his arm before she'd taken a careful half-step sideways. He'd noticed. She'd known he noticed. Neither of them had spoken about it. That charged silence followed them back to the main room like a third presence. "I need to know everything," Jun said. "Who sent you? Who is chasing you? Why her?" Jessica's jaw tightened. "That information has a cost. Everything in this world has a cost. Name yours." She looked at him then, fully, without the careful distance, and what moved across her face was not the calculation of a woman negotiating. It was the exhaustion of a woman deciding whether to trust a man who, by every measure she had ever been trained to apply, she absolutely should not trust. She had been running for 3 years. She was tired in the way that went past the body and settled in the bones. And standing in a penthouse 40 floors above a city that had tried to erase her, across from a man who had pulled a child out of the rain without asking for a reason, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time, the edge of something like relief. And that frightened her more than any of it. "Immunity," she said. "Not from you, from what's coming." Jun said nothing, which, she was learning, was how he said continue. "The people chasing Amara are government, and the man running the operation is the same man who burned my cover 3 years ago and let me take the fall for a sting he designed to fail." Her voice stayed even, her hands stayed still, but her eyes, dark, sharp, carrying years of compressed fury, said everything the controlled voice would not. He thought I was finished. And then, Amara's mother came to me 6 weeks ago with that locket and your name, and suddenly I understood exactly why he'd been sleeping so well. Jun was very still. "He knows what's inside it," she finished. The city hummed 40 floors below them. Between them, the silence was not empty. Keen, it was the kind that filled with things neither of them were ready to say out loud. He didn't know yet that she had already found the bug planted beneath the kitchen counter, or that she had left it exactly where it was, because she needed whoever was listening to hear every word she'd just said. She was 3 moves ahead, and she still wasn't sure it was enough. He heard her before he saw her. 3:47 in the morning, and the sound moving through the penthouse was small and broken and devastating, the kind of crying a child does when they are trying very hard not to be heard. Jun was already awake. He hadn't slept. He had been sitting in the dark with the city behind him and the weight of everything he now knew pressing down on the bones of every quiet decision he had ever made. He was at Amara's door in 8 steps. He opened it quietly and stood in the frame, letting the low light from the hallway fall across the room but no further. She was sitting upright in the bed, her dark curls a wild halo around her face, her small hands pressed flat on the duvet, her cheeks wet with the evidence of a nightmare she hadn't made a sound about until now. She looked up at him, and she didn't look afraid. That was the thing that undid him. She looked at him the way a child looked at someone they had already decided to trust, not because they had earned it, but because there was no one else. And that kind of trust didn't ask whether you deserved it. It simply arrived, and it made a demand of you without saying a single word. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "Tell me," he said. Amara rubbed her face with both palms, a gesture so matter-of-fact, so grown, and then folded her hands in her lap. "There were men in my dream, in black suits, and they were looking for me, but they couldn't see me. And I wanted to run, but I didn't know where to go." She paused. "And then I remembered your ring." Jun looked down at the jade lotus on his hand. "And I stopped being scared," she finished. He sat with that for a moment, not moving, not speaking, just letting it exist in the space between them. What it meant that a child he had known for 4 days had found safety in the image of him, what it cost her to trust so quickly, what it cost him to receive it. "My mother used to tell me a story," he said finally, his voice lower than he intended, quieter, rougher at the edges, like something long locked away being opened in the dark. About a lion who was so feared that the whole forest stayed quiet when he walked. But at night, when no one was watching, he sat at the river alone, because every creature that feared him during the day feared him too much to be near him when the dark came. Amara was very still, listening with her whole body. "Was he lonely?" she asked. Jun met her eyes. Every day of his life, she reached out then, small hand, careful fingers, and placed her palm over his closed fist with a gentleness that could have broken stone. Jun did not move, did not breathe. Something in his chest shifted on its axis, slow and permanent, the way continents moved. In the doorway behind him, Jessica stood without speaking. She had come at the sound too, and she watched Jun, this man who had built an empire on the principle that nothing touched him, sit in the dark and let a child hold his hand. She pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. She had been trained to read people, to find the seam where the performance ended and the person began. And what she was seeing right now had no performance in it at all. That was the moment she stopped being careful about what she felt. She didn't allow herself to name it, but she stopped fighting it. Jun's encrypted phone lit up at 4:13 in the morning. He read the DNA results once, then he set the phone face down on the floor beside him and did not move for a very long time. Amara was the biological daughter of the man he had destroyed to take the Iron Lotus throne, the child of his greatest rival. It is the ultimate irony, sleeping soundly in borrowed clothes while the man who had orphaned her sat outside her door in the dark, held accountable by the simple fact of her existence in a way that no court and no enemy had ever managed. He didn't leave. He sat in that hallway until the city outside began to lighten, sat with what he owed her, with what he could never repay, with the knowledge that protecting her wasn't mercy. It was the minimum. The restaurant was the kind of place where secrets wore expensive suits. Jun had chosen it deliberately. 42 floors above Midtown, private dining room, walls thick enough to muffle everything but the truth. The Iron Lotus Commission had been demanding a sit-down for 72 hours. He had made them wait. A man who arrives on time tells the room he needed to be there. A man who arrives late tells the room needed him. Jessica understood this without being told. She walked in beside him in a dress the color of midnight, her brown skin luminous against the dark fabric, her natural hair pinned back with the kind of precision that looked effortless because it wasn't. She moved like his equal, and the room noticed before anyone said a word. Jun noticed too. He kept his face neutral. He always kept his face neutral. The commission sat at a crescent-shaped table, 5 men, each carrying the particular stillness of people who had survived long enough to stop being frightened of rooms. They watched Jun settle into his seat with the patience of men who believed they held the advantage. They did not know about the locket. That was his advantage. Within the pleasantries were a performance, and everyone present knew it. Wine was poured. Jessica's glass arrived from a separate tray, a small, almost imperceptible distinction that only someone watching for it would catch. Jun's hand moved once, a half-second adjustment, redirecting the glass before it reached her. She noticed. Her eyes cut to his. He looked away first. The meeting moved through its formal choreography, territories, percentages, the language of power dressed as conversation. Jun listened with the patience of a man who already knew every play on the board. He was not here to negotiate. He was here to confirm what he already suspected, that someone at this table had been feeding information about Amara to the wrong people. Commissioner Ra refilled his glass slowly. Then he said, "We know about the girl." The table went very quiet. Jun took exactly one breath. "Which girl?" "Small, red coat, interesting locket." Ra's smile did not reach his eyes. "The child is a liability, Jun. Hand her over tonight and the commission remains intact." The man to Ra's left leaned forward. "This is not a request." Jun looked at Ra, then at the man beside him, then back to Ra. And in that silence, in the precise, terrible quiet of it, every person at that table understood that something had just been decided that could not be undecided. "The girl," Jun said quietly, "is not a negotiating point." Jessica's jaw was steel beneath the composed surface of her face. Her eyes moved once around the table, reading exits, reading postures, and beneath the table her fingers pressed flat against her thigh, counting, steadying. And then she heard it, so faint that someone without her training would have dismissed it entirely. A compressed signal from beneath the east wall floorboard, not a sound, a transmission. They weren't just being watched, and Jun, from the slight shift in his jaw, had known since before they sat down. He did not run. He never ran. He stood from the table with a slowness that communicated precisely one thing, that nothing in this room had the power to make him move faster than he chose to. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Ra with an expression that men spent entire careers learning not to receive. "You've made your last miscalculation," he said, and walked out. Jessica matched his pace to the door without a word. They didn't speak until the elevator closed. "Transmission device," she said. "East wall. Amateur placement, designed to be found." She paused. "Someone wanted us to know this meeting was compromised. That's not surveillance. That's a message." "Yes," Jun said. "From who?" He didn't answer immediately. The elevator opened. They crossed the lobby, stepped into the cold. And Jun still hadn't answered, and Jessica had been in enough operations to know that silence from a man like Jun wasn't evasion. It was arrival. The sound of someone finally landing on something they had been circling for a very long time. The car was waiting. They got in. Jun stared at the partition for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you speak." Jessica turned. "The photograph in my study," he said. "The woman in it. I told you she was gone. I told Amara she was gone. I told myself that every day for 14 years. He paused. But the 4 words Amara whispered to me in that room, the 4 words her mother sent with her, were my sister's name. Her full name. Our mother's version of it, the one nobody outside our blood ever knew. The city moved past the windows. Jessica did not speak. She didn't die in the fire, Jun said. She set it, and every move the rival syndicate has made, every leak, every perfectly timed ambush, every piece of pressure that felt like it came from someone who knew me, it was her. 14 years of her, building the other side of a war she has always intended to win. His voice stayed controlled, almost toneless, almost. She sent Amara to me. She knew exactly what one child in a red coat would do to 20 years of self-preservation. She built the entire architecture around the one thing she knew I couldn't walk away from. Jessica's breath left her slowly. "She knows you," Jessica said. "She created me," Jun replied. "Everything I am, the coldness, the distance, the strategy, I learned it from watching her. I just never knew she was watching back." The car stopped. Jun's phone lit up. A single message. No name, no number. "Did you like my peace summit, brother? Come to the cathedral. Come alone. Come now. Or the Locket's contents go to every government contact I own, and the child spends the rest of her life in a cell." Jessica read it over his shoulder. She read it twice. And then, quietly, carefully, in a way she had not allowed herself since the night she walked through his gates, she pressed her forehead briefly against his shoulder. Not leaning. Was not asking. Just a single moment of contact, honest and unguarded. One exhale. The crack she'd been holding closed for 3 years, opening just enough to breathe. Then she straightened. Her face returned to itself. Her voice returned to itself. "You're not going alone," she said. Jun looked at her for a long moment. He did not argue. He went to the cathedral. That was what she demanded. He did not go alone. Jessica moved through the outer perimeter 40 minutes before Jun arrived. Dark clothing, silent footfall, the precision of years that no cover story could replicate. She had not asked permission. She had simply said no when Jun told her to stay with Amara, and the directness of it had stopped him cold for 2 full seconds before something settled in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. Amara sat in a locked car 3 blocks east, with Jun's most loyal guard beside her. She had her small dark hand folded in both of his, and was telling him, with complete seriousness, about a dream involving a lion and a river. The old guard listened like it was the most important briefing of his career. Inside the cathedral, the dark was total except for candles, dozens of them, arranged with an aesthetic precision that told Jun everything. His sister had always been theatrical. It was her only vanity. She stood at the altar. She looked exactly like the photograph, exactly like the girl he had mourned for 14 years, same jaw, same stillness that their mother used to call the quiet before the lightning. But she was not 19 anymore. She was 33 and dressed in a gray suit, and she wore power the way other women wore perfume, naturally, without announcement. Jun stopped 20 feet from her. "Su-yan," he said. She tilted her head. "You still say my name the same way." "I said it every day for 3 years after the fire." Something crossed her face. Too fast, too human, gone before it could be named. "Then you stopped." "I stopped because grief ends or it destroys you." She looked at him for a long moment, and in the candlelight, with the silence of the cathedral pressing down on both of them, she looked less like a villain and more like a woman who had made one catastrophic decision 20 years ago and spent every day since building a world around it rather than admit the cost. "She was a test," Su-yan said finally, "the child. To see if anything was left of you worth reaching." Her voice was even, the evenness of someone who had rehearsed it. "You failed spectacularly. She is innocent. Everyone in this city was innocent once. She is the daughter of the man I killed," Jun said. "She came through a storm in a red coat with your locket and your message, and I sat outside her door all night because it was the least I owed her. Call that failure. I'll take it." Su-yan's composure moved, barely, just at the jaw, and held. Jun took 3 steps toward her. His voice dropped. "What did you want from this? You have your own empire. You've had it for a decade. What could you possibly still need from me?" She looked away for the first time since he'd entered. "You," she said, quietly, simply. "I wanted you to come to me, to choose me. The way you chose that child in 4 days, the way you never looked across a battlefield and recognized my face because I was too careful and you were too cold, and we built ourselves into people who couldn't reach each other anymore." Her jaw tightened. "I needed to know if you still could." The silence rang between them like a struck bell, vast and old and full of everything 2 people destroyed each other with when they loved each other wrong. Jun's voice, when it came, held no anger. It held something more difficult than anger. I would have chosen you, Soo-yeon, every time if you had let me. Her breath caught, just barely, the smallest fracture in the most expensive wall she had ever built, and in that fraction of a second, 14 years of architecture cracked down the middle. Then the cathedral doors burst open. Federal agents, 12 of them, tactical, fast. Jun turned. Soo-yeon turned. Jessica's voice came through the earpiece Jun had placed before leaving the car. 3 words, calm and precise. Locket already transmitted. The moment Jun had entered the cathedral, Amara's Locket had broadcast. The corrupt network, the senator's buried directives, 14 years of evidence, detonated simultaneously to 6 independent journalists and 2 federal oversight committees. Jun had not come to confront his sister. He had come to give her the conversation she had built a war to earn, and to give Jessica the time to end everything else. Soo-yeon stared at him across the candlelight. She didn't look betrayed. She looked, for the first time in 14 years, like someone who had finally been caught by the one person they had always wanted to catch them. 6 months later, the coastline smelled like salt and ordinary life. A small town 3 hours from the nearest city, the kind of place where the bakery knew your order before you reached the counter, and the loudest thing on Friday nights was someone's radio playing too long after dinner. Jun had chosen it the same way he chose everything, with precision disguised as casualness. No one here knew his name. No one knew what the name had meant. He sat outside a cafe with a coffee going cold in front of him, watching the street with the particular attention of a man still learning not to watch streets. Old instincts, deep programmed. He was making peace with the fact that some things don't disappear, they just become quieter. He heard her before he saw her. Small shoes on pavement, the specific uneven rhythm of a child running flat out with total commitment and zero concern for direction. Then Amara came around the corner in a clean white coat, new, chosen by herself. Her dark curls loose and enormous around her face, her white bow transferred faithfully to a fresh ribbon because some things were simply non-negotiable. She was laughing. The full body, head thrown back kind that belonged to children who felt safe. She hit him at speed and he caught her without standing up, arms closing around her with the ease of something practiced, something real. "You said you'd be inside," she informed him, face pressed against his shoulder. I was watching the street." "You're always watching the street. And you're always running." She pulled back and looked at him with those deep, serious eyes, the ones that still sometimes carried more than a child's eyes should. "Jessica says you're getting better." He looked up. Jessica was walking toward them from half a block away, unhurried, her dark brown skin warm in the coastal light, her natural hair loose and moving softly in the salt breeze. She had traded the tactical blazer for linen. She still moved like someone who knew exactly where every exit was. Jun suspected she always would. He had stopped minding. She sat across from him, reached into her pocket, set something on the table between them. Small, quiet, deliberate. The bug, the one from the penthouse kitchen, the one she had left in place. Carried all this way, kept without explanation. Jun looked at it, then looked at her. "I could have told you," she said, "but I needed to know if you'd trust me anyway." He held her gaze for a long moment, long enough that Amara glanced between them with the patient expression of a child who understood considerably more than she was supposed to. "I trusted you," Jun said, "the night you walked through my gates." Jessica's mouth curved, something quieter and more permanent than a smile. She reached across the table and set her hand palm up in the space between them, not reaching for him, offering. The distinction was everything, and she knew he knew it. Jun placed his hand over hers. The jade ring caught the light. The senator was in federal custody. The corrupt network had collapsed within 3 weeks of the transmission. Soo-yeon had cooperated fully from the moment of her arrest, handed over everything, her files, her empire, 14 years of evidence, and her lawyer had called it a plea agreement, but Jun knew what it was. It was his sister, at 33, finally putting down the war she had started because she didn't know how to ask him to come home. He had visited her once. They had sat across from each other in a concrete room and not spoken for 11 minutes. Then she said, "She has mother's eyes, the girl." And Jun had not been able to answer, and she had nodded like that was answer enough. The Iron Lotus was gone. Jun was officially dead to the underworld, a casualty of the syndicate collapse, confirmed by sealed records and a grave marker in Queens that held nothing but silence. The ghost had laid itself to rest. Amara, and already done with stillness, jumped from her chair and ran toward the water, her white coat catching the breeze, her laughter carrying back across the distance between them. Jun watched her go and felt something settle in his chest with the permanence of stone finding its place at the bottom of a river. Not peace, exactly. He was not sure he was built for peace, but something close enough that he stopped reaching for what he'd had before. He had found his victory, not in power, not in empire. In a little girl's laugh and the weight of a woman's hand in a town that didn't know his name and had no reason to fear it, the ghost of the East River was finally, irrevocably, free. Drop your city in the comments right now. I see every single one of you and I want to know where in the world this story found you today. If Jun's redemption hit something in your chest, if Jessica's patience finally made sense in that last scene, hit subscribe before you leave, because part 2 is already being built. And what we haven't told you yet about those 4 words Amara whispered in the study, about what Su-Yan asked Jun during those 11 minutes of silence, and about the one thing Jessica has never said out loud. That chapter is going to be something else entirely. You do not want to miss it.